You know what they say about first impressions. They're usually wrong, spectacularly so, and in the case of Captain Zara Voss, that wrongness was about to cost the Galactic Detention Authority more than just their pride. The processing bay of the detention ship Ironhold hummed with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that made watching paint dry seem exciting. Two guards, Grex and Clank, stood over a metal table where Zara's belongings were spread out like evidence at a crime scene. Which, technically, they were. "Look at this primitive junk," Grex wheezed through his breathing apparatus, poking at Zara's wrist communicator with a claw that had seen better centuries. Humans and their pathetic technology. No wonder they lost the war so quickly. Clank, whose species had apparently evolved from something that looked like a disappointed walrus, snorted in agreement. 3 solar cycles of resistance. 3. My larvae lasted longer in their first molt. Zara sat in her restraint chair, watching the show with the kind of detached amusement usually reserved for watching someone else's relatives argue at dinner. Her dark hair was disheveled, her uniform torn, and her hands bound with energy shackles that hummed with just enough power to remind her they were there. To any casual observer, she looked like exactly what she was supposed to be, another defeated human prisoner. "You know," she said conversationally, "I'm curious about something. Do you two actually believe the propaganda you're spouting, or is this just part of the whole good cop, bad cop routine? Because if it is, you're both playing the same character." Grex's compound eyes swiveled toward her with the mechanical precision of a broken carnival ride. "Silence, human. Your species' time for clever words ended when you surrendered." "Did we, though?" Zara tilted her head, genuinely interested. "Because I don't remember signing anything." "Do you have paperwork?" "I love paperwork. Really gets my blood pumping." Clank slammed a media appendage on the table, making her communicator jump. "Your homeworld is under occupation. Your fleets are scattered. Your leaders are in custody or dead. What more proof do you need?" "Oh, I don't know. Maybe something with a nice official seal?" "You guys love your seals. I've noticed that about bureaucratic species. The more tentacles you have, the more stamps you need." The guards exchanged glances. Grex leaned closer, his breathing apparatus wheezing like an asthmatic accordion. "You seem remarkably calm for someone facing life imprisonment in the Kepler Nebula mines." Zara shrugged as much as the restraints allowed. "What can I say? I'm an optimist. Besides, I hear the nebula has lovely views this time of year. Very purple. I like purple." "Mock us all you want, human. In 6 hours you'll be processed and shipped out with the rest of the cargo. The Ironhold has never lost a prisoner, and we're not starting with some random human captain." "Random." Zara tested the word like she was trying wine. "You know, that's interesting phrasing. Random implies chance, doesn't it? Like rolling dice or picking names from a hat. Very scientific approach to prisoner classification." Clank began stuffing her belongings into a containment unit with all the care of someone handling dirty laundry. Standard procedure. Every human gets the same treatment. "Every human." Zara nodded thoughtfully. "That's probably very efficient. Saves time on individual assessments. Though I imagine it might occasionally lead to, oh, I don't know, mistakes?" "The Galactic Detention Authority doesn't make mistakes," Grex said with the confidence of someone who had clearly never worked in customer service. "Right, of course not. Silly me." Zara watched her personal effects disappear into the container. "Just out of curiosity, did anyone actually read my service record? Or are we going with the whole random human captain classification?" The guards ignored her, finishing their inventory with the kind of professional indifference that suggested this conversation happened with every prisoner. Which, knowing bureaucracy, it probably did. As they prepared to escort her to her cell, Zara caught sight of something through the massive viewport that dominated the processing bay. A sleek, massive shape hung in the darkness beyond, its hull gleaming with the distinctive angular lines of imperial military architecture. Nice ship out there, she commented casually. Very impressive. Looks familiar somehow. Grex followed her gaze and puffed up with pride. The Decimator. Flagship of the 7th Fleet. She's our escort. Just in case any human rebels get ideas about rescue missions. The Decimator. Zara repeated the name with the same tone most people reserved for discussing the weather. Fascinating. Beautiful ship. I bet she has an interesting history. Indeed. Now move along, prisoner. Your accommodations await. As they led her toward the cell blocks, Zara took one last look at the warship through the viewport. A small smile played across her lips, the kind of expression that suggested she knew something the universe hadn't figured out yet. Which, as it turned out, she absolutely did. The cell block of the Ironhold had all the charm of a morgue designed by someone with a severe personality disorder. Gray walls, gray floors, gray ceiling, and lighting that managed to be both too dim and too harsh at the same time. It was the kind of place that made solitary confinement look like a vacation resort. Chief Warden Vrex waited at the entrance to cell block 7, his 6 arms folded in what might have been authority or indigestion. He was a Valerian, which meant he looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with middle management, and then given the result a really bad attitude. Prisoner designation Human 7742, he announced in a voice that suggested he gargled with gravel for fun. Welcome to your new home. You will find the accommodations adequate for your remaining lifespan. How thoughtful, Zara replied, taking in the surroundings with the air of someone evaluating a hotel room. Very minimalist. I appreciate the commitment to the aesthetic. Gray is so versatile. Vrex's mandibles clicked in what might have been annoyance. You will be housed in cell 247 with prisoner designation Reptilian 1138. Standard protocol. 2 prisoners per cell maintains optimal space efficiency. Optimal space efficiency. I love it when wardens talk technical. It's so romantic. The procession moved deeper into the cell block, past rows of containment units that hummed with force field generators. Through the transparent barriers, Zara could see dozens of alien prisoners from species she recognized and several she didn't. Most looked up with the kind of curious indifference that marked long-term inmates. The Ironhold operates on a strict schedule, Vrex continued, apparently determined to give the full orientation speech whether she wanted it or not. Meal periods are at 0800, 1200, and 1800 hours. Recreation is permitted in designated areas for 2 hours daily. Medical attention is available upon request and review by the medical board. Medical board. That sounds ominous. Do they actually provide medical attention, or do they just review your request until you feel better? The Ironhold maintains the highest standards of prisoner care as mandated by Galactic Convention 2847b. Right, the one about cruel and unusual punishment. I'm familiar with it. Fascinating reading, really. Especially the appendices about psychological torture disguised as administrative efficiency. Vrex stopped walking and turned to face her, his compound eyes glittering with something that might have been respect or might have been the urge to use her as a stress ball. You seem unusually well informed for a defeated enemy combatant. I read a lot. Occupational hazard. They reached cell 247, and the force field shimmered down with a sound like disappointed static. Inside, a small reptilian creature looked up from what appeared to be a game of solitaire played with food pellets. Pip, Vrex announced, meet your new cellmate. Try not to let her die in the first week. It reflects poorly on your record. Pip, who looked like someone had shrunk a dinosaur and given it anxiety issues, nodded nervously. Yes, Chief Warden. I'll keep her alive, probably. Probably. Zara raised an eyebrow as she stepped into the cell. That's reassuring. What's the mortality rate around here? Low, Vrex replied curtly. We prefer our prisoners alive. Dead prisoners don't provide useful labor. The force field reactivated, sealing them in with a finality that suggested the Ironhold took its security very seriously indeed. Rex departed with his entourage, leaving Zara alone with her new roommate. "So," she said, settling onto the lower bunk with the resigned grace of someone who had slept in worse places. "Pip, right? Interesting name. Short for something?" "Piprix Katal Nethmore," Pip replied in a voice that suggested he expected to be laughed at. "But everyone calls me Pip. Easier to pronounce, and humans seem to like simple names." "Pip it is. I'm Zara. And yes, that's actually my full name. We humans are efficiency experts when it comes to nomenclature." Pip peered at her with large, golden eyes that held the kind of wariness that came from too much experience with the universe's sense of humor. "You're very calm for someone who just got life imprisonment. Most new prisoners spend the first day crying or planning escape attempts." "Are escape attempts common?" "Common? Yes. Successful?" Pip's laugh sounded like a tea kettle with trust issues. "The Ironhold has held prisoners for 200 years. No one has ever escaped. The security systems are too advanced, the guards too numerous, and the ship too far from any hospitable systems." Zara looked around the cell with the kind of careful attention usually reserved for museum exhibits. Her gaze lingered on the ventilation grate, the door frame, the power conduits running along the ceiling. 200 years. That's quite a track record. Very impressive engineering. "The force fields are triple redundant," Pip continued, apparently warming to his subject. "The hull is reinforced duranium. The navigation systems are isolated from all other ship functions. Even if someone could access the computer core, they couldn't change course or send communications. Isolated navigation systems. Smart design choice. Prevents exactly the kind of problems you'd expect from desperate prisoners with technical knowledge." Pip nodded enthusiastically. "And the guard rotations are randomized using a quantum algorithm. No patterns to exploit. Plus, the decimator stays in escort position at all times. Even if someone somehow escaped the Ironhold, they'd never make it past the flagship." "The decimator," Zara mused, settling back on her bunk. "Tell me about her. Must be quite a ship to escort a prison transport." "Oh, she's legendary. Dreadnought class, full battle configuration. They say she's never lost an engagement. Her captain is supposed to be some kind of tactical genius." "Is that so?" Zara stared at the ceiling, where faint vibrations suggested the ship's engines were running at standard efficiency. Tactical genius. I wonder what that means exactly. Pip arranged his food pellets into neat rows, a nervous habit that probably helped pass the time. "They say the captain understands human psychology better than humans do. That's how they won the war so quickly." Psychology. Zara's smile was barely visible in the dim lighting. Fascinating subject. All about understanding how people think, predicting their behavior. Of course, it only works if you actually know who you're dealing with. Something in her tone made Pip look up from his pellets. "You sound like you have experience with tactical planning." "A little. You pick things up over the years." Zara closed her eyes, but her voice remained conversational. "Tell me, Pip. In all those escape attempts over the past 200 years, did anyone ever try using the ship's own systems against it?" "What do you mean?" "Oh, nothing specific. Just curious about the theoretical possibilities from an engineering perspective." Pip studied his new cellmate with growing interest. There was something about the way she asked questions, the casual precision of her inquiries, that suggested her interest in the Ironhold's security wasn't entirely academic. But then again, every prisoner probably spent their first night wondering about escape routes. It was natural. Human even. What Pip didn't know was that Zara Voss had spent those same 200 years on the other side of similar conversations, but designing the very security protocols that kept prisoners exactly where they belonged. The irony was about to become apparent to everyone aboard both ships. The mess hall of the Ironhold looked like someone had designed it using the blueprint for despair, and then decided it wasn't depressing enough. Long metal tables stretched across a room that managed to be both cramped and cavernous, filled with the kind of multi-species prisoner population that made intergalactic relations look simple by comparison. Zara carried her tray of what the menu optimistically called nutritional protein blend and surveyed her dining options with the air of someone choosing a table at an exclusive restaurant. She settled next to a blue-skinned Andromedan who was poking suspiciously at his meal with a fork that had seen better decades. "Mind if I sit? I'm new to the neighborhood." The Andromedan looked up with eyes that held the weary wisdom of someone who had been disappointed by the universe on a professional level. "Krell, and sure, human. Misery loves company, as your species says. And thanks, I have to say, the ambience here is really something. Very atmospheric. Like dining inside an industrial accident." A chittering laugh came from across the table, where an insectoid creature was somehow managing to consume the protein blend, despite having mandibles that looked better suited for construction work. "You humans and your humor. I am Zix's. I have been here for 47 standard years, and this is the first time I have heard someone compliment the decor." 47 years. Zara tested her meal with the caution of someone who had learned to be suspicious of military rations. "That's quite a stay. You must know this place pretty well." "Better than I know my own molting cycle," Zix confirmed. "Every routine, every protocol, every guard rotation. Knowledge is the only wealth we have left." "Speaking of guards," Zara nodded toward the elevated platform where 3 armed Valerians kept watch over the dining proceedings. They seemed pretty confident in their security arrangements. Krell snorted, a sound that suggested his species had evolved cynicism as a survival trait. "Confident? They're practically comatose. When was the last time anyone even tried to cause trouble? Trouble is inefficient," added a new voice. A mechanical being rolled up to their table, its optical sensors whirring as they focused on Zara. "I am Unit 447, designation, former engineering specialist. Statistical analysis indicates that troublemaking results in extended sentences with 97.3% probability." "Oh, Unit 447. Interesting designation. Former engineering specialist of what exactly?" "No." The robot's sensors dimmed slightly. "Imperial Naval Vessel designation classified. My memory banks were partially wiped upon capture. Standard security protocol." "Partially wiped. But not completely?" "Correct. Basic technical knowledge remains intact, enough to maintain simple systems, perform routine calculations. Nothing that could compromise Imperial security." Zara nodded thoughtfully, filing away this information with the same care most people reserved for tax documents. "That makes sense. Can't have captured engineers running around with knowledge of classified systems." "Exactly." Zix clicked his mandibles in agreement. "Though I have always wondered what would happen if someone with the right security codes tried to access restricted systems. Hypothetically speaking." "Hypothetically," Krell agreed, "it would depend on the specific codes and the systems in question. Not that any of us would know anything about Imperial security protocols." The conversation continued in this vein, seemingly casual but with the kind of underlying structure that suggested everyone at the table understood they were discussing more than just theoretical scenarios. Zara asked questions with the innocent curiosity of someone new to their circumstances, while her tablemates provided answers with the helpful enthusiasm of people who rarely got to demonstrate their expertise. The guard stations, she mentioned casually, they're positioned for optimal visual coverage, I assume? Primary stations, yes, Unit 447 confirmed. However, auxiliary monitoring is handled by automated systems. Sensor arrays, motion detectors, thermal imaging. The organic guards are merely backup systems. Smart design. eliminates the possibility of human error, or alien error, in this case. Though Zix added with the air of someone sharing a trade secret, automated systems can be predictable. Patterns emerge over time. Maintenance schedules, power cycling, diagnostic routines. Patterns, Zara repeated. Interesting. I suppose if someone were observant enough, they could map those patterns, chart the optimal times for various activities. Theoretically, Krell agreed. Though what activities would require such timing is unclear. We prisoners lead very simple lives. The lunch period was winding down, but Zara had heard enough to confirm several suspicions and develop a few new ones. As they prepared to return their trays, she made one final observation. You know what strikes me as odd? All this security, all these protocols, but they're designed around the assumption that prisoners are trying to escape. What if someone's goal wasn't to leave the ship, but to control it? The table fell silent. Even the general background noise of the mess hall seemed to fade as her words settled into the minds of beings who had spent years, decades, thinking about the theoretical impossibilities of their situation. Control it? Zix's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. You mean take command of the Ironhold itself? Just wondering about the theoretical possibilities. I mean, if someone had the right access codes, the right knowledge of Imperial systems, the right understanding of command protocols, she shrugged. But that would require someone with very specific qualifications. What kind of qualifications? Krell asked, though something in his tone suggested he was beginning to suspect the answer. Zara stood, balancing her tray with the casual grace of someone who had eaten in military mess halls across half the galaxy. Oh, you know, command experience, technical knowledge, maybe some background in naval operations, the kind of resume that would be very interesting to anyone who bothered to read it carefully. She walked away, leaving her new friends to contemplate the implications of her casual observations. Behind her, she could hear the kind of whispered conversation that suggested her theoretical scenarios were being taken very seriously indeed. What none of them knew yet was that Zara's qualifications were not only very specific, but very familiar to at least one ship in their immediate vicinity. The Decimator had been her command for 3 years before the war ended. Her voice prints were still in the recognition database. Her command codes were still active in the ship's memory banks. And in about 6 hours she was going to remind everyone exactly why reading prisoner files was more than just bureaucratic busy work. The guards might have been laughing now, but their sense of humor was about to be severely tested. Recreation period aboard the Ironhold was like watching a depression support group try to play games they'd invented to pass the time between existential crises. The recreation area itself was a large compartment filled with the kind of equipment that suggested someone had read a manual about prisoner morale without understanding any of the actual principles involved. Zara found herself in the middle of what appeared to be a very serious discussion about theoretical engineering problems. Word of her lunch conversation had spread through the prisoner population with the speed of gossip in a small town, and suddenly everyone wanted to contribute their expertise to her hypothetical scenarios. The main computer core, Krell was saying, sketching diagrams on the metal table with his finger, is protected by 17 different security layers. Physical barriers, encryption protocols, biometric scanners. Even if someone could reach it, they'd need command-level access codes. Command-level access codes, Zara mused, watching him draw. Those would be pretty rare, I imagine. Not the sort of thing your average prisoner would have lying around. Exactly. Chimed in Thix, a tentacled being whose species apparently communicated through color changes as much as words. His skin was currently shifting through shades of green that suggested intense concentration. Only senior Imperial officers would have such codes. Admirals, fleet commanders, strategic command personnel. Strategic command personnel, Zara repeated thoughtfully. That's a pretty exclusive club. I wonder how many of them ended up as prisoners. Unit 447 rolled closer, his optical sensors whirring as they focused on the makeshift diagram. Statistical analysis of captured personnel indicates 0.03% probability of command-level prisoners in general population. Most senior officers were either killed in action or executed upon capture. Most, Zara noted, but not all. Correct. Some were deemed too valuable for immediate termination. Intelligence purposes. Psychological warfare. Examples to demoralize remaining resistance. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Guard Clank, who had apparently drawn the short straw for recreation period supervision. He lumbered over with the kind of authoritative waddle that suggested he took his duties very seriously. "What's this gathering about?" he demanded, his voice carrying the tone of someone who expected trouble and was disappointed not to find it immediately. "Just discussing theoretical physics," Zara replied with the innocent smile of someone who had never caused trouble in her life. "Very academic stuff. The mathematics of propulsion systems, that sort of thing." Theoretical physics. Clank's expression suggested he ranked theoretical physics somewhere between tax preparation and voluntary surgery on his list of enjoyable activities. "Why?" "Me, when educational purposes. We're trying to keep our minds sharp. Mental exercise is important for long-term prisoners, don't you think?" The guard looked around the circle of alien faces, all of whom were nodding with the enthusiasm of people who had discovered a new hobby. "As long as you're not planning anything." "Planning what?" Thix asked, his skin shifting to shades of blue that probably indicated confusion. "We're discussing the theoretical maximum efficiency of fusion reactors. It's not exactly practical knowledge for our current situation." Clank grunted and moved on, apparently satisfied that a group of prisoners discussing reactor efficiency posed no immediate threat to ship security. Which, to be fair, was probably correct under normal circumstances. These were not normal circumstances. "Where were we?" Zara asked once the guard was out of earshot. "Command codes," Krell replied. "The theoretical accessibility of restricted systems to hypothetical personnel with appropriate clearance." "Right. And we were discussing the likelihood of such personnel being available in our current location." "Very low, Unit 447 confirmed. Though I should note that my memory banks contain fragmentary data about voice recognition protocols. Imperial ships use vocal pattern analysis for command verification." Voice recognition. Zara's tone suggested this was a new and fascinating concept. "How does that work exactly?" "Biometric vocal analysis," the robot explained, warming to his subject. "Each individual's voice pattern is unique. The system creates a digital signature based on vocal cords, resonance chambers, speech patterns. Even if someone knew the correct command phrases, they couldn't access restricted systems without the matching vocal signature. Unless, Zix interjected with the air of someone making a brilliant deduction, the system already had that person's vocal signature on file. Then the voice recognition would work perfectly. "Perfectly," Zara agreed, "though that would require the hypothetical person to have previously had legitimate access to the systems in question." The implications of this observation settled over the group like fog rolling in from a particularly ominous sea. They were no longer discussing abstract, theoretical scenarios. They were talking about a very specific possibility that suddenly seemed far less impossible than it had an hour ago. "Zara," Krell said slowly, "exactly what kind of work did you do before you were captured?" She looked around the circle of faces, reading the mixture of hope, suspicion, and dawning realization in their alien expressions. "Oh, you know, government work. Very bureaucratic, lots of paperwork and meetings. The kind of job where you spend most of your time dealing with regulations and protocols." "What kind of government work?" Thix pressed, his skin now cycling through colors that suggested intense curiosity mixed with something that might have been hope. "Strategic planning, mostly. Resource allocation. Personnel management. The usual administrative stuff." She paused, studying the ventilation grate above their heads with the same attention most people reserved for fine art. Though I did spend some time in operational roles, hands-on experience, you might say. Operational roles, Unit 447 repeated. In what capacity? Zara's smile was the kind that suggested she knew something the universe was about to find out the hard way. Well, let's just say I'm very familiar with Imperial naval protocols, especially the ones related to command structure and ship operations. The recreation period was almost over, but the real planning was just beginning. As the prisoners began to disperse, each carried with them the growing certainty that their theoretical discussions were about to become very practical indeed. Guard Clank, watching from his post, noticed nothing unusual. Just another group of long-term prisoners trying to keep their minds occupied with abstract academic discussions. He would later reflect that perhaps he should have paid more attention to exactly what they were discussing and who was leading the conversation. But by then it would be far too late for such reflections. The night shift aboard the Ironhold was when the ship's true nature revealed itself. During the day, it could almost pass for a regular transport vessel with an unusually high security rating. At night, with the lights dimmed and the corridors echoing with the hum of containment systems, it became exactly what it was, a prison that happened to fly through space. Zara lay on her bunk, listening to the ship's rhythm with the kind of attention most people reserved for their favorite music. Every vibration, every mechanical sound, every subtle shift in the engine harmonics painted a picture of the Ironhold's current status. To Pip, sleeping fitfully on the upper bunk, it was just background noise. To Zara, it was a real-time systems report. The force field generators were running at standard efficiency. The life support systems were cycling normally. The navigation computer was maintaining course and speed exactly as programmed. And most importantly, the communication array was operating on full power, maintaining constant contact with their escort vessel. The decimator was out there, hanging in space like a patient predator, ready to respond to any threat or irregularity. Her crew would be running standard patrol routines, confident in their overwhelming tactical superiority and the impossibility of any real threat emerging from a prison transport. They were about to learn that confidence and stupidity were often indistinguishable from a distance. Zara had spent the past 18 hours gathering intelligence, building relationships, and positioning herself for what was about to happen. Every conversation, every casual question, every theoretical discussion had been laying groundwork for this moment. The guards thought they were dealing with just another defeated human prisoner. Her fellow inmates suspected she might be more than she appeared, but had no idea exactly how much more. The truth was that Admiral Zara Voss had surrendered herself deliberately, allowing her capture as part of a larger strategic plan that was about to reach its critical phase. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to a new battlefield. At exactly 0347 hours, she sat up and spoke in a voice that carried clearly through the dim confines of cell 247. Computer, recognize voice pattern Admiral Zara Voss, Imperial Navy, authorization code Omega-77 Alpha. The response was immediate and devastating. Every screen in the cell block flickered to life. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in red as klaxons began wailing throughout the ship. From her cell, Zara could hear the confused shouts of guards who suddenly found themselves dealing with something that wasn't covered in their training manuals. Voice pattern recognized, came the calm, synthetic voice of the ship's computer. Admiral Voss, you are currently listed as missing in action. Please confirm your status and location. Status confirmed. Computer. I am currently being held prisoner aboard this vessel. Initiate Emergency Command Protocol 77 Alpha. Protocol 77 Alpha initiated. Transferring primary command authority to Admiral Voss. Please stand by. The force field containing cell 247 shimmered and died. Throughout the cell block, similar barriers began failing as the ship's computer systematically overrode every security protocol that didn't originate from command-level authorization. Pip fell out of his bunk with a thud that suggested he was having trouble processing what he was witnessing. Zara, what's happening? How are you doing this? Remember those theoretical discussions we've been having? Zara stood and stretched, working out the kinks that came from sleeping on a prison cot. Turns out they weren't as theoretical as everyone thought. The door to their cell opened with a soft hiss, and Zara stepped into the corridor where chaos was rapidly becoming the dominant organizational principle. Guards were running in multiple directions, shouting into communicators that were apparently no longer connecting them to anything useful. Prisoners were emerging from their cells with the cautious wonder of people who had stopped believing in miracles years ago. "Computer," Zara said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade through butter, "patch me through to the decimator. Priority Alpha channel. Channel open, Admiral." The voice that answered was crisp, professional, and absolutely certain that whatever was happening couldn't possibly be what it seemed to be. "Ironhold, this is Decimator Command. We're reading massive system failures on your end. Report your status immediately." "Decimator Command, this is Admiral Zara Voss. I'm afraid there's been a slight administrative error regarding my prisoner classification." The silence that followed was the kind that suggested someone's worldview was undergoing rapid and involuntary renovation. "Admiral Voss?" The voice was different now, older, with the careful control of someone who had just realized they were standing in a minefield. "Admiral, you were reported killed in action during the Battle of Proxima 7. Reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated, Captain Morrison, though I appreciate the sentiment. Now, I believe we need to discuss the current tactical situation." "Captain Morrison." Zara smiled as she recognized the voice of her former tactical officer, a competent but unimaginative man who had been promoted to command when she disappeared. He would follow protocols exactly, which was both his strength and his weakness. "Admiral, with respect, you're currently listed as a prisoner aboard a detention vessel. I need verification of your identity before I can acknowledge any command authority." "Of course you do, Captain. Computer, transmit my full biometric profile to the decimator. Include command verification codes and complete service record." "Transmission complete, Admiral." Another pause, this one filled with the kind of tension that suggested multiple people were having very bad days simultaneously. "Identity confirmed." Morrison's voice was hollow with the realization of just how badly things were about to go wrong for him. "Admiral, we were told you were captured and executed." "I was captured, Captain. The execution seems to have been postponed indefinitely. Now let's discuss the immediate situation. I'm currently aboard the Ironhold with several hundred prisoners who are very interested in a change of venue. I trust the decimator is prepared to facilitate that." "Admiral, I'm not authorized to negotiate with hostile forces. My orders are to prevent any escape attempts by any means necessary." Zara's smile was the kind that had made enemy commanders reconsider their career choices on multiple occasions. "Captain Morrison, I'm not a hostile force. I'm your commanding officer, and I'm not escaping. I'm resuming command of my ship." The implications of this statement rippled through both vessels like shock waves from an explosion. On the Ironhold, the remaining guards were discovering that their weapons wouldn't fire and their communications were being rerouted through systems they couldn't access. On the decimator, a crew that had been prepared for routine escort duty was suddenly facing the possibility that they were about to become prisoners themselves. "Computer," Zara continued, her voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had never doubted her right to command, "scan the decimator and identify all personnel aboard. Cross-reference with Imperial Navy records and identify any crew members who served under my previous command." "Scan complete, Admiral. 47% of current decimator crew served under your command during your previous assignment. 17 officers hold positions that report directly to the captain." "Excellent. Open a general communication channel to all decimator personnel. This is Admiral Zara Voss speaking to all crew members of the Imperial Navy vessel Decimator. Some of you served under my command before my disappearance. Others know me by reputation. All of you took an oath to follow the orders of your superior officers. Her voice was now being broadcast throughout both ships, reaching every crew member, every guard, every prisoner. It carried the kind of absolute confidence that had once commanded fleets and won battles that should have been impossible. As of this moment, I am resuming command of the Decimator and all associated vessels. Captain Morrison, you are hereby relieved of command. All personnel will report to your stations and await further orders. The response from the Decimator was immediate chaos. Half the crew consisted of people who had served under Zara Voss and knew exactly what she was capable of. The other half were trying to figure out whether this was some kind of elaborate prisoner escape attempt or the most awkward change of command in military history. Captain Morrison's voice, when it came, was tight with the kind of stress that suggested his career was flashing before his eyes. Admiral, I cannot relinquish command based solely on vocal identification. I need physical verification, proper documentation, authorization from Fleet Command. Captain, Zara replied with the patience of someone explaining basic concepts to a particularly slow student. I am currently standing in the corridor of a prison ship that I just took control of using voice commands. The computer systems recognize my authority. 47% of your crew knows me personally. What additional verification do you require? Admiral, this situation is unprecedented. I need to consult with higher authority. I am higher authority, Captain, but I understand your confusion. Computer, scan Captain Morrison's quarters aboard the Decimator. Locate the sealed orders he received regarding my status. Scanning complete, Admiral. Located classified file labeled Operation Endgame, Admiral Voss status. Contents indicate strategic deception operation. Captain Morrison was informed that you were killed in action to maintain operational security. The silence that followed was profound enough to serve as a meditation retreat for monks with commitment issues. Operation Endgame, Zara said pleasantly. Captain Morrison, I believe you're beginning to understand the situation. My capture was not an accident. My imprisonment was not a failure. It was phase 1 of a plan that is now entering phase 2. From across the ship, she could hear the sounds of her fellow prisoners taking control of guard stations, armories, and critical systems. Unit 447 had apparently found his way to the computer core and was busy demonstrating that his memory wipe hadn't been as thorough as advertised. Krell and Thix were coordinating prisoner movements with the efficiency of people who had been planning this for years instead of hours. Admiral, Morrison's voice was now carrying the hollow tone of someone who had just realized he'd been playing checkers while everyone else was playing three-dimensional chess. What are your orders? My orders, Captain, are very simple. Prepare to receive refugees from the Ironhold. We'll be transferring several hundred individuals who are eager to resume their interrupted careers in the Imperial Navy. Refugees? Former prisoners, Captain. Many of whom, I suspect, were also victims of strategic deception operations. The galaxy is full of people who were reported dead when they were actually just misplaced. As if to emphasize her point, the communication system crackled with a new voice. Admiral Voss, this is General Krell, formerly of the 5th Marine Division. Permission to report for duty? Granted, General. Welcome back to active service. Admiral, came another voice, Commander Thix, formerly of Naval Intelligence. I believe I have some information that might interest you about the current state of Imperial fleet deployments. Excellent, Commander. I look forward to your briefing. One by one, her fellow prisoners were identifying themselves not as random captives, but as senior military personnel who had been systematically removed from active duty through various deception operations. The Ironhold hadn't been just a prison ship. It had been a storage facility for everyone the current Imperial command structure considered inconvenient. Captain Morrison's voice, when it came, was barely above a whisper. Admiral, how many of you are there? How many of us are there, Captain? On this ship alone, I count 3 admirals, 7 generals, 12 senior commanders, and approximately 400 personnel with specialized knowledge of classified Imperial operations. Galaxy-wide? She paused, considering. Well, that's classified information. But I think it's safe to say that reports of the rebellion's death have been greatly exaggerated. The takeover of both ships was now complete. The guards who had been laughing at the human prisoner were now discovering what it felt like to be on the wrong side of a very large misunderstanding. The crew of the Decimator was learning that their routine escort mission had somehow become the most significant military operation in recent history. Computer, Zara announced, set course for the Kepler Nebula. We have some mining operations to inspect. Course plotted and laid in, Admiral. Admiral Morrison interjected, the Kepler Nebula is heavily fortified. If we approach without proper authorization. Captain Morrison. Zara replied with the kind of gentle patience usually reserved for explaining physics to goldfish. We are proper authorization. We're the Imperial Navy. We're going to liberate several thousand prisoners who I suspect are also not as dead as they're supposed to be. Then we're going to have a very interesting conversation with whoever's been running this operation. The engines of both ships hummed to life with a sound that suggested they were eager to be going somewhere more interesting than a routine patrol route. Behind them, the coordinates of the Ironhold's patrol route were being transmitted to networks that had been assumed destroyed years ago. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning again with the people who were supposed to be dead leading the charge. 3 hours later, Admiral Zara Voss stood on the bridge of the Decimator, looking out at a view that would have made travel brochures weep with envy if travel brochures were written for military conquests. The Kepler Nebula stretched before them in all its purple, swirling glory, shot through with stars and cosmic phenomena that made the universe look like it was showing off. More importantly, it was also bristling with defensive installations that were about to have a very bad day. Admiral. Commander Thix reported from the sensor station, his skin cycling through colors that suggested intense concentration mixed with barely contained glee. I'm reading 47 defensive platforms, 3 armed stations, and what appears to be a prison complex that's roughly the size of a small moon. Roughly the size of a small moon, Zara repeated thoughtfully. How many prisoners would you estimate that could hold? Conservative estimate? 50,000. Optimistic estimate? Twice that. General Krell looked up from the tactical display where he'd been plotting attack vectors with the enthusiasm of someone who had been denied his favorite hobby for far too long. Admiral, the defensive grid is impressive, but it's designed to repel external attacks. If we approach as Imperial vessels with proper authorization codes, which we have, Zara confirmed, because we are Imperial vessels with proper authorization codes. Exactly. We could be inside their perimeter before they realize we're not who they think we are. Captain Morrison, who had been standing to one side with the expression of someone watching his career explode in slow motion, cleared his throat. Admiral, I feel obligated to point out that what you're describing constitutes mutiny, rebellion, and treason against the Imperial government. Zara turned to face him with the kind of smile that had once made enemy diplomats reconsider their negotiating positions. Captain Morrison, I appreciate your concern for proper procedure. However, I think you're operating under a fundamental misunderstanding about the current situation. She gestured toward the main display, where intelligence reports were scrolling past in a steady stream of information that painted a picture of systematic deception on a galactic scale. Computer, display summary of Operation Endgame findings. The screen filled with data that made Morrison's face go through several color changes that would have impressed even Thix. Lists of personnel reported as killed in action who were actually imprisoned. Strategic resources diverted to unauthorized operations. Military units reassigned to missions that didn't officially exist. The Imperial government we've been serving, Zara continued conversationally, appears to have been systematically removing competent military personnel and replacing them with individuals who are more concerned with personal advancement than strategic effectiveness. The result is a command structure that couldn't organize a birthday party, let alone run a galactic empire. But the war, Morrison protested weakly. We won. The human resistance was defeated. The human resistance was one small part of a much larger problem, Captain. The same people who've been disappearing competent officers have also been creating conflicts to justify their continued authority. The war wasn't won, it was managed. And now it's time for new management. Unit 447 rolled up to the command station, his optical sensors bright with what might have been excitement if robots could feel such things. Admiral, I've completed analysis of the prison complex's security systems. They're using modified Imperial protocols, but with several critical vulnerabilities, such as the Command Authorization System. It's designed to recognize senior Imperial officers and grant them administrative access to all facilities. They never anticipated that the officers they imprisoned might someday return to active duty. Zara's laugh was the kind that made junior officers nervous and enemy commanders start looking for exit strategies. They imprisoned the people who designed the systems they're using to keep us imprisoned. That's either brilliant irony or spectacular stupidity. But I'm voting for spectacular stupidity, Krell added cheerfully. It's more fun that way. The approach to the Kepler Nebula proceeded with the kind of routine efficiency that made it clear this was not the Decimator's first visit to the area. The defensive grid challenged them with proper procedures, received proper responses, and allowed them to proceed with the bored professionalism of people who had done this dance thousands of times. What they didn't know was that this time the dancers had changed. Prison Complex Control. This is Imperial Navy vessel Decimator requesting permission to dock for prisoner transfer operations, Morrison announced, reading from a script that Zara had provided. Decimator, this is Complex Control. Permission granted. Proceed to Docking Bay 7. Standard security protocols are in effect. Acknowledged, Complex Control. Proceeding to Docking Bay 7. As the massive prison complex grew larger on the main screen, Zara found herself impressed despite everything. It was an impressive piece of engineering, designed to hold vast numbers of people in complete security while maintaining the administrative efficiency that made the Imperial bureaucracy famous throughout the galaxy. It was also about to become the largest recruitment center in military history. Admiral, Thix reported, I'm detecting familiar energy signatures from the complex. Based on the patterns, I estimate we're looking at approximately 60,000 prisoners, including several thousand with military-grade biometric signatures. 60,000. Zara nodded approvingly. That should be enough for a decent start. Start of what? Morrison asked, though his tone suggested he was afraid he already knew the answer. The restoration of competent military leadership to the Imperial Navy, Captain. We're going to liberate every qualified officer in that complex, restore them to active duty, and then have a very serious discussion with whoever authorized this operation. The docking procedures proceeded smoothly, with the kind of bureaucratic efficiency that suggested no one at the complex suspected anything unusual. Security teams met them at the airlock with the bored professionalism of people who had done this countless times before. What they found, instead of the routine prisoner transfer they were expecting, was Admiral Zara Voss flanked by senior officers who were supposed to be dead, carrying authorization codes that opened every security system in the complex. The liberation of the Kepler Nebula prison complex took exactly 47 minutes and was conducted with the kind of military precision that reminded everyone involved why these particular officers had been considered dangerous enough to disappear in the first call. By the time the sun set on the nebula, which was a purely theoretical concept in deep space but sounded dramatic anyway, the complex had been converted from a prison into the headquarters of what Admiral Voss was calling the Competency Restoration Initiative. 60,000 former prisoners were now 60,000 active-duty military personnel with a collective chip on their shoulder the size of a small planet and the knowledge, skills, and motivation to do something about it. The guards who had been laughing at the human prisoner were now discovering what unemployment felt like on a galactic scale. And somewhere in the depths of space, networks that had been dark for years were coming back online, carrying messages that would make Imperial Command very nervous indeed. Admiral Zara Voss stood on the observation deck of her new flagship, looking out at a fleet that was growing by the hour as ships arrived from across the galaxy. Each one carried personnel who had been reported dead, missing, or transferred to classified operations. "You know," she said to no one in particular, "there's a valuable lesson in all this about the importance of proper record-keeping and the dangers of assuming your enemies are actually dead." Behind her, the command center hummed with the activity of people who had been given a second chance to do their jobs properly. The war might have been over, but the peace was just beginning. And it was going to be very interesting indeed. The human tendency to survive impossible situations and turn them into opportunities was about to become a galaxy-wide phenomenon. The guards had stopped laughing entirely.